Hey, podcast fam, Eric here. And if you're an affiliate marketer or looking to monetize your online presence, you need to know about shareasale.com. ShareASale is not just an affiliate network. It's your gateway to a world of opportunities. With thousands of high-paying affiliate programs across various niches, ShareASale connects you with top brands ready to collaborate with content creators like you. Imagine earning commissions for simply sharing products you love. Whether you're into fashion, tech, or lifestyle, ShareASale has got a partnership waiting for you. Ready to turn your passion into profits? Head over to MilwaukeeMafia.com/ShareASale and sign up today. It's free, it's easy, and it's your ticket to unlocking a new revenue stream for your business.
You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your weekly podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another Milwaukee Mafia podcast. We got another great episode for you. Gavin, take her away with what we're talking about.
Hey, Eric. Sure wish I had a brandy to drink right now.
Oh, man. Why didn't you remind me?
Well, it's okay. This week we're going to talk about Many Murders Part 2.
Ooh.
Or it's kind of Part 3, really. But so, in the course of putting this episode together, I was going through my notes, and I actually found that I have a series of about 10 murders and bombings between 1905 and 1910. They're not in this episode, and they don't appear in the book. But if somebody wants to hear about them, I can put them together in another episode. They didn't make the book because they didn't really fit into the story I was trying to tell. But if people want further examples of why this is a bad neighborhood to live in, there are still more stories out there.
And I think everybody wants to hear about murders. That's what
seems like it.
That's what we're here for. So.
Okay, so in the Milwaukee Mafia book, the murders of 1911 through 1912 are all in a single chapter. We divided them up on the podcast. First, we did Many Murders. Then we did the Dominic Leone Little Pink Church episode. And this is Many Murders Part 2. But if you have the book, these will all be in the same chapter. So for those following along at home, Many Murders Part 2.
Kick her off.
Mike Perricone and Vito Parlapiano, and I might be butchering these names as usual, they were childhood friends in their hometown in Sicily. Perricone ran a successful antique shop, and Parlapiano labored in a macaroni factory in their small village. And that does sound like a joke to say a macaroni factory, but that's really a thing that a lot of Italians did. Later, when the men moved to Milwaukee, Perricone left his wife and child behind and paid for his friend's passage. They decided to share a double home on Van Buren Street, and they worked together in the foundry for Alice Chalmers. And a slight step aside here, I know that not all of our listeners are from Wisconsin, and so I wanted to just kind of touch on Alice Chalmers for a moment. It has nothing to do with the story, but just so people know what it is. Alice Chalmers was sort of a conglomeration of various Milwaukee businesses going back to around the year 1860. A new factory was built in an area west of Milwaukee. That area was first called Honey Creek, then it was called North Greenfield. When the new factory went in, what do you suppose they changed the name to?
North Greenfield?
No.
Okay.
They changed it to West Alice.
Oh, okay.
So West Alice is named after Alice Chalmers. This was actually kind of a thing that happened. Around here, you're familiar with the city of Kimberly.
Yep.
Do you know why it's called Kimberly?
Because somebody's last name was Kimberly.
It is because someone's last name was Kimberly. It's because that's where the workers who worked at Kimberly-Clark, that's where they lived.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is the thing. Like, if you owned a factory, you'd build a small town for your workers, and then they could name it after you.
It's a little weird in Kimberly, because isn't that kind of far away from Kimberly-Clark, in a way? I guess maybe that's...
They had multiple mills.
Okay, so they had a mill in the vicinity of Kimberly then.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So Alice Chalmers was a company that made all kinds of things. They started out with flour mill equipment, and then farming equipment, and then blast furnaces. So they've made a little bit of everything. They were a foundry, they were a factory, they've made all sorts of stuff. And unfortunately, as of January of 1999, they ceased to exist.
Bummer.
Yeah, so Alice Chalmers isn't even a thing anymore. But it was like one of the major factories in Milwaukee. So just so people have an idea of what that is. On December 17th, 1912, Perricone went next door, the other side of the duplex, went next door to visit Parlapiano, and they played cards for a few hours. During the course of conversation, Perricone told Parlapiano that he would help his friend track down the source of extortion letters that he had been getting. He had been getting these letters in the mail saying that they wanted $500. And, we've talked about this in other episodes, these Black Hand letters where they make these threats on you. Well, they started talking about this, and the man receiving the letters started to think that the handwriting looked a lot like the handwriting of his friend. He thought this was very odd, and he knew what his friend's handwriting looked like because the man receiving the letters wasn't a very good reader-writer, so he'd have his friend help him write letters home. So he knew what his handwriting looked like. He's like, okay, wait a second. I think you know where these letters are coming from. At that moment, Perricone, the man who's alleged to have written the letters, these names get kind of confusing. The man alleged to have written the letters tried to shoot Parlapiano, but his gun jammed. Parlapiano was then able to pull out his gun. He shoots first. He gets off 6 rounds.
Wow.
3 of the bullets find their way into his target. Parlapiano, seeing what he had done, was sort of shocked. He went from just wanting to confront his friend. All of a sudden, his friend is now full of bullets. He takes off running. He's running up and down throughout the neighborhood. He finally makes his way to a drugstore, and at that point he realizes, well, there's really nothing I can do about this. I mean, this guy's dead in my house. So he turns himself into the police. Perricone dies at the emergency hospital, and Parlapiano is held for first-degree murder. This is a few days before Christmas, so his wife comes to the prison, or the jail, whatever, and is like, could you please let my husband out for Christmas? We have a son at home. He would really like to see his father for Christmas. And that didn't fly.
Okay.
So if you're held for murder, you don't usually get to go home for Christmas. Now, bartender and bank president Michael Cicero was a friend to both of the men, and he told the press that he felt the whole incident was either a practical joke gone wrong or a big misunderstanding. I am sure that Perricone had nothing to do with the Black Hand here, he said. He was a quiet, peaceful young fellow and seemed never to mix with the other Italians here. But I say he might have written the letters. Maybe he wrote them as a joke, knowing that it would frighten his friend. That is the trouble with the Italians. They are either much in earnest, or they are joking like schoolboys, and one can hardly ever tell which. Which, of course, that's always a funny joke when you write a letter threatening your friend.
Yes. Yeah. I do that 2-3 times a week.
Yeah. And if the name Michael Cicero sounds familiar to you, it's because he came up in our last episode. He ran the tavern where Dominic Leone died in front of.
I was actually going to ask about that because the name did sound familiar.
Yeah.
I just figured it was the same last name as somebody else that you had mentioned previously.
No, but a lot of the same names will come up again and again. At the preliminary hearing, Parlapiano got his attorney, who was also the local counsel, the diplomat who dealt with the Italian community. He went out there and he said that, this guy is not a murderer. He's a hero. Perricone was a well-known member of the Black Hand. He went from one home to another upon the slightest pretext. He picked out the men upon whom tribute was to be levied. He never stayed more than a few minutes in each place. If the family looked prosperous, it was sure to receive a letter demanding money. So this guy now, he's not a killer. He's getting rid of one of these extortionists. He's doing the right thing.
Just to stop you for a minute, because just for anybody that may not have listened to the previous episode that brought up the Black Hand.
Okay.
And just to remind me, now do I remember right, is the Black Hand something that people just thought kind of existed but didn't exist, or did we discuss that as being kind of, there wasn't like a nationwide Black Hand, but there was a Black Hand possibly regionally in Milwaukee?
You got the right idea. You got the right idea there. Yeah, the Black Hand, see, the way the newspapers would talk about it, they would say the Black Hand or the Black Hand Society, and they made it sound like it was this real organization and possibly even an organization that had members all over the country. And that's not, as far as we can tell, that's not realistic. It's just a method that people used. They would write letters and they would write these threats and whatever. And people did use this method all over the country.
But there was no connection.
But there was really no connection. If Perricone was really a Black Hand letter writer, and I don't even know if he really was, but assuming that he was, he probably did not know anybody in Chicago doing this or Detroit or whatever.
And there wasn't like a weekly Black Hand Society meeting in Milwaukee even. It was just kind of a nickname they gave to people that wrote these kinds of letters.
Right.
Okay.
And even as far as like the Mafia goes, some Mafia members might have wrote Black Hand letters, but not everybody who wrote a Black Hand letter was necessarily in the Mafia.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets confusing because people say, oh, there's a Black Hand Society. And then they're like, oh, well, that became the Mafia. And that's not really, it gets confusing, but basically that's not accurate at all.
Or there is no evidence to show that that is accurate.
That's another good way of putting it. Yeah. Which is always a problem with this is there's so much that we'll never know. All right. So the case goes to trial 2 months later, which is pretty quick. You don't really see that anymore. He claims self-defense. The jury goes out for 49 minutes. They required 2 ballots, so the first time they weren't all convinced. But the second time they come back and they read the verdict, and what do you suppose the verdict was?
Well, I would say that he has a legitimate chance of getting off on this just because the guy was in his house. The guy did draw a gun on him, right?
Oh, allegedly, yeah.
So I think could have been not guilty, but probably in this situation, because there seems some reasonable reason that he might not be guilty, he was probably definitely found guilty.
No, you had it right the first time. He's found not guilty.
Okay, good. Not good, but whatever.
Well, then it might be good.
Yeah.
It might be good. The courtroom full of Italians burst into cheers, and the judge had to smash his gavel several times to calm them because they were getting a little too rowdy. And within days, according to the newspaper, he was recruited by the police to help dismantle other members of the Black Hand. Now, I have no idea if that's true. We never get an update on that. So I don't know if that's just the paper just making up stories, because the paper's full of a lot of exaggerations.
They like to perpetuate the Black Hand story a little bit.
So these tumultuous years of violence in Milwaukee, we have one more notable victim in the Italian colony to talk about. And that man's name is Carmelo Schiano. So again, if I mispronounce, I apologize. I'm trying my best. He was a native of Sicily, just like most of these guys were. He had served for 2 years in the Italian army. He came to America in September of 1901. He briefly stayed in Pittsburgh before moving to Milwaukee. He was actually pretty early on in Milwaukee, coming as early as 1901, 1902, which is ahead of the average. So he comes in. He moves into the third ward like everybody else. In the summertime, he was a fisherman, and in the winter, he was a fruit vendor, which really wasn't too profitable because there isn't really a lot of fruit in the winter, but it's probably even harder to fish in the winter, so he did what he could. Married a local girl, and pretty much as far as anybody could tell, he was just, a hardworking, normal Sicilian immigrant. But after sundown on the evening of December 30th, 1912, Schiano stepped out onto the porch of his home. A man came out of the shadows in the space between the Schiano home and a neighboring house, unloading both barrels of a sawed-off shotgun. Schiano was hit several times in the head, with his eye being completely destroyed by the pellets, I guess. The assailant dropped the weapon and ran through the backyard and across the railroad tracks. Schiano's wife ran outside upon hearing the shots and threw herself on her husband, her dress soaking up the spreading pool of blood.
That's very graphic.
It is. This is the newspaper. This is the way they wrote it. Nearby was a spilled pail of beer.
It's Milwaukee, so we got to throw that in there, right?
Yeah, just in case everybody forgot. Yeah. We have people drinking out of pails of beer around here. Inside the house was their 3 children, ages 1 through 8, and now they were left without a father. Mrs. Schiano was also pregnant with a 4th child. "We are poor," she told the press. "Carmelo made only a few cents a day during the winter, and we barely had enough to buy food. What will my children do? Who will feed them now? Who will buy the coal? Who will pay the rent?" At the time of his death, all that he had in his pockets was a handkerchief and $2.14. Wasn't a rich guy. And then they were like, well, why was he targeted? Why did they shoot him?
Why did they shoot him?
We'll get there. An officer arrived at 7 o'clock that night. a little bit after the shooting, and had to remove the wife from her husband's body. He found the still smoking sawed-off shotgun between the home and the building next door with 2 empty cartridges inside, so the weapon was thrown away. Returning the next day to use the sunlight, he found 8 bullet holes in the porch across the street. One of the holes was as wide as a dime. The coroner examined the body, noting that the right eye was, quote, almost completely destroyed, and finding that the brain was, quote, extensively lacerated. The cause of death was pretty obvious.
Yeah, I would say so.
Police suspected the motive for his murder was revenge. They speculated that Sciano may have somehow been involved in the slaying of Dominic Leone. He had been questioned at the time of the death of another man, Vincenzo Ferreira, back in 1907, so like 5 years prior, and it was no stretch to think that he could have been involved with multiple slayings in the area. Now, I don't know what it is that made them think that he was, because from what little I'm able to put together, this guy does not seem to be connected at all. He just seems to be a regular, guy with a young family trying to work.
The fact that they focus on how broke he was.
Yeah. Right?
Like, you would think if you're out killing people, you're doing it with some intent of making some money. Or, I mean, unless people are just giving him nickels and dimes to go kill people, and he seems to think that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's very strange. And, of course, the problem I run into is these police files are long since destroyed. And maybe in there they would have explained why this guy was a suspect, but they don't exist and it's on the newspaper, so I don't know. It's very weird to me looking at it as an outsider and saying, this guy is, one moment he's a victim, and the next moment they're like, oh yeah, we thought he was going to be, the killer of all these other guys. Like,
do you feel like there could be the police are using, like, okay, we have a murder over here, and we had a murder over here. We're going to try to use these 2 people to explain both these murders to make people think, okay, well, now this person's dead, this person's dead. These situations can't happen again. Kind of, if that makes sense.
Actually, I think you're really onto something with that. Whether it was true or not, the way that the police and the newspapers talked about it was that any time somebody was killed, there was going to be a revenge killing. And then when there's the revenge killing, then there's a revenge killing for that. And so, yeah, whether this guy was involved or not, I think that's going to be like their instinct. It's like, well, this guy just got killed, and this must be revenge for the last guy.
Yeah. And maybe it's just even where they live. This guy got killed, and he was in the neighborhood where this other guy who killed this guy over here, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Almost like a kind of like a gang thing.
Well, it's definitely like a gang thing.
Gang territory type stuff like that. I could very well see them tying things like that together in that way.
So Sciano's 4 brothers, they went to the morgue, and according to the newspaper, and I do not necessarily believe this is true, but according to the newspaper, these 4 brothers went around the body and they cried out, "Oh, Mary, Mother of God, give us the power, the strength, and the wisdom to find the slayer of our brother, and then, oh God, direct us how to act." They told the police that Carmelo had not received any threatening letters and had no enemies. The newspapers said that they believed that all 4 of these brothers were Mafia members and that they had sworn the ancient Sicilian oath of vengeance. I don't necessarily believe any of that, but this is the way that the paper wrote about it.
So tell us about the ancient Sicilian, what is it? The ancient
Sicilian oath of vengeance, which that's a thing, actually.
Oh, I thought this was just something they pulled out of their...
I mean, I think this is a great exaggeration, but we have a word in English that is taken from this thing. You want to know what that word is?
I want to know what that word is. I have no idea what that word is.
The word is vendetta.
Really?
Yeah.
Which I guess I can hear that.
Yeah, it's an Italian word about getting revenge on somebody who wronged you.
Very cool.
So, I mean, whether these guys are really mob guys planning to get revenge, I have no idea. But it was commonly thought that people had vendettas when a member of their family or whatever was killed. So a man was arrested shortly thereafter, but they couldn't connect him to the crime. The best they could do was put him in jail for a night because he had a revolver on him and he was in a tavern. At that point in time, it was perfectly okay to carry a revolver on you, even concealed, but you couldn't bring it in a tavern. That was a no-go.
Which is a very good idea.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's a reason that we don't let people carry guns in taverns.
yeah.
This detective is a man named Harry Ridenour, and I'm probably saying Ridenour wrong, but he ends up going up the ranks, and he actually gets to be fairly well known shortly after this, because on October 14th, 1912, actually that might be shortly before this, but either way, about the same time, President Roosevelt is in Milwaukee, and a man tries to assassinate him. The detective tackles the man, and Roosevelt actually did get shot. If anybody wants to hear about that story, we can talk about it. It's nothing to do with the Mafia whatsoever, but if anybody wants to hear the story of President Roosevelt getting shot in Milwaukee, oh yeah, we can talk about that.
I imagine it wasn't a severe shooting or anything.
I'll give you the very brief version of the story. So President Roosevelt is giving a speech.
Mm-hmm.
He gets shot. He actually gets shot in the chest. And I don't remember what it is, but he has something in his pocket where it hits him hard enough that he's bleeding, but it stops it from actually like causing him to get, dead.
He probably had a whiskey flask in his
I
pocket.
I don't remember offhand what it is that he's got on him. But whatever it is, he gets shot. And according to the coverage at the time, he continued to make a speech for another 90 minutes. Before he went to the hospital to get checked out.
How have I never heard this story before?
I don't know.
That just goes to show you how sheltered I am.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's another one of those great things about Milwaukee. But, that's the really super short version, is a guy tried to kill him, and President Roosevelt's just too strong. You can't take him down.
You can't take him down.
Yeah. An anonymous Italian in the 3rd Ward told the press that the solution to all these murders was hiring an Italian patrolman. He said that the residents were not opposed to finding the killers, but they had an irrational fear of the police. The average foreigner is ignorant of the laws of the United States, he said, and there exists a prejudice that does not disappear in the first generation. Speaking to the press, the police chief agreed with this. He said they would love to have an Italian police officer. Quote, "There is not an Italian in Milwaukee acceptable to us with the nerve or desire to accept the best position in the Milwaukee Police Department." He claimed that he had searched for 10 years, offering the job a few times, and every time he offered the job, they turned him down. Quote, "They fear they will be killed if they join the department. The minute an Italian joined the force, he would become a marked man." The Milwaukee Journal asked various citizens to respond to this, and they universally agreed that an Italian detective should be hired. A few pointed out that he doesn't even need to be an Italian, just so long as he can speak Italian. That would be really helpful.
I think we discussed on a previous episode that if somebody, an Italian, were to take a position as a police officer, wouldn't the Mafia view that as, well, he's just doing his job? We're not going to really mess with him? Or...
Yeah.
Because we kind of talked about with the priest and stuff like that, where they kind of have that philosophy that he's doing his job. We're not going to leave him alone. Not that they don't kill police officers, because I'm sure they have on plenty of occasions, but...
It's generally rare.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, like I said, not that it hasn't happened, but it's generally rare. I mean, even later on when the FBI gets involved, a lot of these guys will like mess with the FBI, like they'll taunt them and make fun of them and stuff like that. But they don't ever even though it's really easy to find out where a guy lives, they never go and actually do anything to him. Mm-hmm. So this is 1912. The first Italian joins the Milwaukee Police Department in what year?
It's 1912, right?
This story is 1912, so...
1915.
Not even close.
Okay.
Not until 1928.
Wow.
So another, 16 years? And the thing about that is, we've mentioned this in the past, I know. In November of 1917, there was a bomb that was brought to the Milwaukee police station. It killed 9 police officers, which was the single largest loss of police life for over 80 years. I mean, a major, major event. And this happened in the Italian neighborhood, but they have no police officers who speak Italian that are from the Italian community.
So they couldn't go and interview anybody about the...
No.
Oh, wow.
No. So that case, they end up arresting a bunch of people, and they do end up going to prison. But it's almost convincing when you look back on it that the people they arrested and put in prison are probably not even the right guys. They just had to get somebody. Yeah. So it was a real big mess. It was like the biggest case of its time, and they had no way to investigate it.
Like, I understand the challenges of being a police officer back in these times without the technology and stuff to do the things they do. But, man, it just seems like the more and more stories I hear, they just did not do a very good job.
I mean, you can't blame them for not knowing Italian.
Yeah, but, I mean, I feel like there's got to be a workaround for that. Go to Dominic Leone in his pretty pink church and have him translate for you.
Yeah. I mean, they'd get interpreters and stuff. Sure, definitely. But it still takes a lot more work than just being able to go door to door or whatever.
Yeah, and if you do get an interpreter, can you really trust the interpreter? Interpreting correctly?
That's always a risk, yeah.
Because like you said, the Italian community tends to protect their own and stuff like that. So
yeah.
So, and along that same line, the testimony or the interviews probably aren't going to be very reliable either, because how much are the people going to really tell you?
Sure, yeah.
So
all kinds of hurdles there.
So
that's it for the many murders.
Wrap up.
Yeah.
No more killing today.
No, not today.
Not today. But tune in, because we'll be back with more killing.
Plenty more killing.
Gavin, you want to hit them with some contact info?
Sure. The website is MilwaukeeMafia.com. You can find all sorts of information there. If you want to email me directly, you can email me at MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. I've gotten very few emails. I would love to hear from people, especially if you've got questions or ideas for future shows.
Yeah, we're hoping you're not just downloading the episode and actually listening to the episode. So hit us up with some emails, ask some questions. All right. Well, I think that wraps this week's episode up, Gavin.
I think so.
Everybody have a good one. We'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next week for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey there, e-commerce enthusiasts. Let me tell you about a game changer in shipping, ShipStation. It's the ultimate platform for simplifying your shipping process. With ShipStation, you can easily import, manage, and ship your orders in no time. It integrates seamlessly with your favorite e-commerce platforms and carriers, ensuring a smooth workflow. Gain valuable insights with their powerful analytics and reporting tools. Say goodbye to shipping headaches. Visit MilwaukeeMafia.com/ship and level up your shipping game today.